AI avatars, legacy design, and the future of fashion, Norma Kamali's digital twin. This research examines Norma Kamali's AI avatar, or designer digital twin, as a case study in the transformation of fashion legacy under artificial intelligence. Framed through the classical figure of Pygmalion, the chapter that it comes from asks what happens when a crafted image, archive, or authorial signature appears to come alive through technological mediation. Kamali's collaboration with Maison Meta is read not simply as a design tool or branding experiment, but as a new apparatus of fashion succession, an archive-trained generative system capable of extending a founder's design language far beyond the immediate hand of the designer. The chapter argues that designer digital twins convert archives into generative succession infrastructure, shifting fashion heritage from preservation toward governed production. Drawing on theories of simulation, post-human authorship, fashion semiotics, digital twin engineering, AI creativity, and archival heritage, the research situates Kamali's project within wider debates around authenticity, authorship, and digital likeness and brand control. Introduction. From Pygmalion to digital twin. Quote, "His art concealed his art." End quote. In Ovid's account of Pygmalion, the artist carves an ivory figure so perfect that the boundary between artifice and life begins to tremble. The statue appears to possess the grace of life. Its surface is so convincing that the sculptor can no longer accept it as inert matter. What begins as form becomes fantasy and ultimately ends in animation. Pygmalion's art is most powerful at the moment when it disappears as art, and the made thing seems to move under its own authority. The myth has haunted Western thinking about representation because it stages a desire that returns whenever technology promises to literally enliven the artificial. This is the fantasy that has followed every technology of simulation, that the crafted form will eventually answer back. This is also the central seduction of AI-generated fashion imagery. When the image is convincing enough, the apparatus disappears. Now, Norma Kamali's artificial intelligence avatar, or digital twin, belongs to a radically different technological and ethical world from Ovid's ivory statue. However, Pygmalion offers a useful point of entry because Kamali's project also hinges on the animation of a manufactured form. In this case, the object brought toward life is not a statue, but an entire design oeuvre. Decades of garments are transformed into a computational system capable of generating new possibilities and a recognizably Kamali design vernacular. Where Pygmalion animated ivory, Kamali is animating her legacy. Her archive becomes not only a record of what has been made, but a system through which future design can be imagined. Kamali's AI should not be understood simply as another tool for trend prediction, image generation, or economic personalization. It is more specific and more conceptually charged. It is an attempt to train a proprietary AI system on a designer's own body of work so that the system can generate new design possibilities in relation to that archive. Maison Meta describes the project as custom generative AI design copilot that was trained on more than 40 years of Kamali's own design and copyrighted archive. The Pygmalion myth also helps clarify what is at stake in the word twin. A digital twin is not merely a copy. It is a simulation that claims a dynamic relation to an original system. In Kamali's case, the twin models a design language. It attempts to recognize and recombine the formal tendencies that make a garment or silhouette appear Kamali-like. The AI avatar is therefore not Kamali. It is a computational arrangement of signs and prompts that can simulate aspects of her aesthetic authority. My chapter questions whether designer digital twins are able, in fact, to convert archives into generative succession architecture, thereby transforming the archive from a site of preservation into a system of future production. Fashion is always dependent on archives. Houses preserve patterns, sketches, and samples in order to maintain continuity across time. Founder-led brands in particular face the problem of succession. How can a design language persist after the founder retires, withdraws, or, worst case scenario, dies? Traditionally, this problem has been managed through creative directors, heritage collections, museum exhibitions, and controlled reissues. Kamali's AI introduces another possibility. It suggests that the founder's archive can be converted into a generative model that can become a collaborator within the future of the brand. Kamali is an especially revealing figure through whom to examine this shift because her career has long been organized around transformation. So, now the archive becomes a machine for generating future forms. From one angle, the AI project could therefore not be seen as an abrupt departure from her design history, but as an extension of a long-standing interest in utility, adaptability, technology, embodiment, as well as access. She is a bright, intuitive, and curious thinker, and her own interests have always fed her design process and kept her cresting the wave of new innovation. However, the Pygmalion framework also warns against enchantment. Ovid's story is seductive because the work of art appears to come alive, but that very seduction conceals questions of power, projection, and control. The statue is animated according to the maker's desire. Its liveliness is inseparable from the fantasy imposed upon it. Kamali's case reverses the gendered structure of the myth in important ways. Here, a woman designer is not the passive statue, but the active author of her own technological afterimage. She is not being resurrected by an outside creator without consent. She is participating in the construction of a system intended to extend her design ethos. Even so, the ethical questions remain urgent. Who controls the archive, the output, and ultimately, the digital twin itself? Who decides whether an AI-generated output is sufficiently Kamali? And what point does legacy become simulation? And at what point does the simulation become exploitation or even farcical? These questions require a theory of authorship adequate to post-human fashion. Jean Baudrillard's account of simulation helps frame the AI avatar as a problem of authenticity, a model that may produce a Kamali-like image without any original garment that it corresponds to. Donna Haraway and Rosie Braidotti help us understand the digital twin not as an autonomous replacement for the designer, but as a hybrid assemblage of human memory, archive interface, machine learning, and future human creation, not to mention corporate governance. Ursula Franklin's distinction between holistic and prescriptive technologies further asks whether such systems expand creative agency or formalize it into controlled sequences of repeatable outputs. The digital twin is therefore not only a technical object, it is a cultural arrangement through which creativity, labor, ownership, and responsibility are redistributed. The legal stakes are equally significant. AI-generated fashion raises questions not only about the copyrightability of outputs, but also about the transformation of archives into training data. The U.S. Copyright Office's report on copyrightability stresses the continuing importance of human authorship in works involving generative AI, while its report on generative AI training turns attention to the use of copyrighted material in the construction of models. Kamali's case is distinctive because the system is publicly described as trained on her own archive, rather than on a large pool of scraped fashion imagery from the past. However, even a designer-controlled archive is rarely the work of one person. It may contain the additional labor of pattern makers, assistants, as well as photographers, models, and stylists. To make the archive computational is also to make those ancillary laborers available to a new technical and commercial apparatus. All right, so let's take a look at Norma Kamali's oeuvre that this new machine learning model is training on. So her work is best understood as a sustained project of functional glamour, I would say. Her design practice was shaped by mobility and self-invention. After studying fashion illustration at FIT, she worked as a reservations agent for an airline operating a UNIVAC computer and traveled repeatedly to London, absorbing the energy of the 1960s youth culture. She opened her first New York store in '67 and began to design her own pieces in 1968. Her early work already contained the vocabulary that would define her career: applique, tie-dye, velvet, rhinestones, hot pants, stretch, body consciousness, and a confidence that clothing could be theatrical without being impractical. Kamali's most important innovation lies in her ability to treat garments not as static objects but as systems of transformation. The 1973 all-in-one dress and other multi-style jersey designs exemplify this principle. Her clothes often collapse boundaries between sportswear and evening wear, as well as beach and street. Her sleeping bag coat is probably the most clear emblem of her design philosophy. This was born after she cut up her own sleeping bag following a camping trip. The coat then translated outdoor insulation into desirable urban fashion. Its achievement was not simply novelty, it made warmth mobile. And the Museum of Modern Art notes that it later appeared in fashion editorials less as camping equipment than as avant-garde accessory. There's also that iconic red bathing suit that the dazzling Farrah Fawcett wore in the ubiquitous 1976 poster, which became one of the most recognizable fashion images of the decade. There was also the Francesco Scavullo 1977 Cosmo cover of the then 23-year-old Christy Brinkley in the purple pull bikini, which helped launch Kamali swimwear almost overnight. In Kamali's own account, swimwear appealed to her because it allowed her to draw the body directly through clothing, linking to her early ambition to be a painter. And it combined with later interests in anatomy, motion, and form. Her sweats collection in 1980 was another dramatic intervention. Kamali took sweatshirt material, something quotidian, absorbent, and democratic, and elevated into a full wardrobe for day to night. The CFDA describes sweats as one of the innovations through which Kamali added to the fashion lexicon, long before athleisure was a word. Kamali's innovations also extended to hybrid footwear. In 1982, she designed and patented the high-heeled sneaker. She also designed costumes for Sidney Lumet's The Wiz and Twyla Tharp's In the Upper Room. Her 1984 Fall Fantasy video and 1986 fashion video catalog are especially important because they show Kamali understanding clothing through movement, storytelling, screen culture, and retail experience, long before fashion film became a standard luxury tool. Across the 1990s and 2000s, Kamali increasingly framed fashion as lifestyle infrastructure. Her 1995 travel collection of wash and wear wrinkle-free garments rolled into a reusable sack extended her commitment to ease, portability, and care. Her 1996 website launch tied to a virtual reality presentation of her fall collection, and her 1998 e-commerce initiative placed her among the designers experimenting early with digital retail. Later projects, including the Wellness Cafe and Kamali Culture Under $100, all show that Kamali's innovation was not restricted to silhouette or just fashion. She repeatedly redesigned the systems through which fashion operates. Now in the 2020s, she has conjoined her long-standing interest in technology with generative AI. All through it, Kamali has always treated fashion as a living interface between body, technology, performance, and self-definition. Okay, so if you look at her signature looks, she was always very her. I've always noticed there's kind of like a 30s feeling to her 30s and 40s vibe to the garments as well, with the shoulders, pads, and that, she'll often have a victory roll hairstyle that she herself wore a modified version of. And it's all just very Norma. Okay, so let's do a little literature review right now from the chapter. So the digital twin of a fashion designer sits at the intersection of literary histories of artificial beings, engineering accounts of digital twins, and AI. Fashion studies debates on authorship and archive. And legal ethical questions around copyright, labor, and digital likeness are also very relevant to the AI avatar exploration. So there's Ovid's Pygmalion, which I started with in this talk, which clarifies the seduction of simulation. The more persuasive the artificial becomes, the more its conditions of making disappear. Shelley's Frankenstein shifts the problem toward responsibility, asking what obligations follow from artificial creation, while Villiers de l'Isle Adam links artificial likeness to desire, projection, embodiment, and ethical consequences. In engineering research, a digital twin usually refers to a virtual model dynamically related to a physical entity, process, or system. Kamali's AI is not a full engineering twin of the designer as a person, but a partial twin of a design language, a modeled relation to an archive and repertoire of forms. Science and technology studies caution against treating the system as autonomous. Legal debates sharpen this point. Even when a model is trained on a designer's own archive, that archive may contain the labor and rights of photographers, stylists, models, pattern makers, as well as other collaborators. In terms of fashion studies, fashion is structured not only by novelty, but also by repetition, citation, and return. Roland Barthes complicates the idea of a single creative origin, even as fashion's commercial value continues to depend on names, signature house codes, as well as authorized archives. AI changes the archive by making it generative. It can produce new design proposals, but it can also create a commercially coherent loop of recognizable brand signs. Jean Baudrillard's theory of simulation offers one of the most productive ways to understand the problem posed by Kamali's AI. In Simulacre and Simulation, Baudrillard argues that simulation is no longer a matter of copying an original reality. It is the generation of a real without origin, a hyperreal produced through models. This theoretical frame is strikingly relevant to AI-generated fashion because a model trained on Kamali's archive does not simply copy one garment. It produces new images that look as though they belong to the Kamali universe, even when no original Kamali garment corresponds to them. This destabilizes the traditional fashion idea of authenticity. In luxury fashion, authenticity is usually tied to provenance, authorship, and brand control. A garment is authentic because it comes from the authorized house. But designer identity has also always mattered. A Chanel garment designed under Gabrielle Chanel, Karl Lagerfeld, Virginie Viard, or now Mathieu Blazy may all be institutionally Chanel, but each belongs to a different authorship regime. The designer's hand and authority still shape how fashion history will assign the meaning. Kamali's AI complicates the structure. If the AI is trained on her archive and used by her company, then its outputs may be institutionally authentic, but are they creatively authentic? Baudrillard helps us see that the question may not have a stable answer. This is not necessarily a cause for moral panic. Fashion is always dependent on repetition, quotation, revival, and the maintenance of house codes. Creative directors routinely reinterpret archives. Brands continually restage their own signature. The difference is that AI can automate the recombinatory logic of archival design. It can produce variations at a speed and scale that human design teams would never be able to match. This intensifies the risk that style becomes a closed loop. The archive generates the future by endlessly recombing through the past. Kamali's own response to AI hallucinations is of interest here. Rather than treating these distortions as failures, she describes them as potentially generative. This suggests that the value of AI may not lie in perfect replication, but in a form of controlled estrangement. The machine misreads the archive, and that misreading becomes a source of novelty. In Baudrillardian terms, the simulacrum may not merely replace the real, it may produce new forms of fashion reality, The ethical and aesthetic question is whether those new forms remain open to interpretation or whether they become a self-referential system of tired brand signs. Now, if Baudrillard frames the AI avatar as a problem of simulation, posthuman theory helps frame it as a problem of distributed creativity. Donna Haraway's cyborg theory challenges the boundary between human and machine, arguing that modern subjectivity is already hybrid. And Kamali's avatar can be read as a fashion cyborg, not as a machine that replaces the designer, but a hybrid assemblage of the archive. It extends Kamali's design practice far beyond any biological origin, but it does so only through a system of technological mediation. Rosi Braidotti's posthumanism is also useful because it resists both nostalgic humanism and naive techno-utopianism. For Braidotti, the posthuman condition requires new ethical frameworks for understanding subjectivity as relational, embodied, and entangled with non-human forces. Kamali's AI avatar, therefore, should not only be evaluated by asking whether it is really creative. A more productive question is, what kind of creative subject does it produce? Ursula Franklin's work adds an important caution. Franklin argues that technology is not merely a collection of tools, but a practice embedded in social relations. Her distinction between holistic and prescriptive technologies is especially valuable here. Holistic technologies allow makers to retain control over the process from conception to completion, where prescriptive technologies divide work into controlled sequences that can reduce autonomy and produce cultures of compliance. Kamali's AI can be evaluated through this distinction. If it remains a holistic extension of Kamali's practice, then it may expand creative agency. If it becomes a prescriptive apparatus that dictates what counts as Kamali, then it may narrow the brand's future. Now, in terms of AI as brand succession, fashion has always been haunted by the problem of succession. What happens when a founder leaves, retires, or dies? A fashion house is never only a business. It is a system of signs organized around authorship, aspiration, as well as control. The founder's name becomes a label, and the label becomes a guarantee. Some houses manage succession by appointing a new creative director who interprets the past through the present, while others preserve founder codes through studio teams, licensing structures, and archival reissues. Kamali's AI introduces another model, the archive-trained digital twin as mechanism of creative continuity. Its appeal lies in the promise that a brand might preserve the aura of the founder without freezing itself into nostalgia. Intellectual property law complicates the application of an AI avatar at every stage. The U.S. Copyright Office's 2025 report on copyrightability and AI affirms that copyright protection in the United States depends on human authorship and that AI-generated outputs are protectable only when sufficient human expressive contribution is present. Prompts alone are considered insufficient. Now, this is important because if a future Kamali collection were generated largely through an archive-trained model, the company would need to identify where human authorship enters. The issue does not end with output ownership, though. The Copyright Office's Part 3 report addresses generative AI training, which is especially urgent, for archive-trained design models. Kamali's project is publicly framed as ethically distinct from large systems trained on scraped, unauthorized images because Maison Meta describes it as built from Kamali's own design. That controlled basis may reduce concerns about consent and appropriation, but does not eliminate governance questions. A designer archive is rarely the work of one person alone. When the archive becomes machine readable, all the contributions of everyone that went towards making garments or representations of them risk being absorbed into the singular aura of the founder. The rise of digital replicas in fashion makes this governance problem also quite prescient. In 2025, H&M announced plans to generate AI-generated digital twins of real fashion models for marketing use, with models retaining rights over their AI images, immediately raising questions about consent, compensation, and displacement across the modeling and creative labor ecosystem. Kamali's case is obviously ethically distinctive because she has publicly endorsed the AI project and participated in its development. In terms of risks, I'd say the most immediate danger of designer AI avatars is not that they will fail to recognize a designer's style, but they will recognize it a little too well. Archive-trained models are built from what has already been made visible: silhouettes, motifs, and brand signature. In Kamali's case, a model may learn the visible grammar of her work without understanding why those forms materialized in their original moments, how they responded to themes like technology, nightlife, feminism, mobility, and evolving ideas of freedom. It may know what a signature Kamali looks like without knowing how a Kamali became possible in the first place. This is where the archive risks becoming a trap. A living designer does not generally repeat her own codes. She usually contradicts them, revises them, and plays with them. Style evolves because it is shaped by time, accident, and markets. Fashion's own commercial structure intensifies the risk of producing endless variations of the original. Luxury and designer brands depend on repeatable codes because recognizability creates value. The logo, the house color, and the archival reference all allow products to circulate as legible signs. Another danger appears when the designer avatar moves from the studio into e-commerce. Shoshana Zuboff's concept of surveillance capitalism in political economics, which denotes the widespread collection and commodification of personal data, is very relevant here. Zuboff describes a system in which human experience is translated into behavioral data for prediction, optimization, and profit. This becomes central when AI avatars are connected to e-commerce, personalization, and adaptive user journeys. Now, let's get into talking about the actual collection itself. I would say that a final risk that the designer AI avatar pose is they may concentrate fashion power rather than democratize it, but we can discuss that further later. I want to look a little bit at what they are doing with the legacy of Norma Kamali. Okay, so I went through the website at Maison Meta, who are the AI partners of Norma Kamali on this project. And first glance, some of it looked really gorgeous. This is beautiful. I thought that was, and it is very Kamali. I liked it. Then I started looking a little closer. Okay, so Norma Kamali herself likes things like this, the glitches that AI tends to produce. It is certainly a dramatic image, and will definitely get a lot of traction in terms of social media. Problem is, what happens when you're trying to actually get garments from this? I think this is great. It's really certainly engaging imagery, and it certainly stops you in your tracks. But then I started looking at some of the actual models that they were having, that the AI had generated, and there were real problems with construction, like how are you going to make it, the fit on that. If you ignore the fact that that poor model, AI generated model, is missing her, like her hand has been cut off from her arm. Looking at that bathing suit, the way the straps sit, it just would not stay on unless you taped it or glued it. And having crystals in the crotch of a bathing suit is just, it's terrible for the wearer. The one on the right, there's really no way I can see that would stay on the model because the fit is a stretch garment, but it is structured like something that would have boning or corsetry inside because there's no straps on it. So in terms of actually making that, I can't see how physically you would make that into a bathing suit. Same idea here. If you put aside the issues with physical proportions of this AI generated model and look at that terrible bathing suit, the sewing's awful. There's all these weird puckering happening. And just the construction is terrible. And, you know, something like this, like how would you send this to market? Like your clients would not buy it. Same thing here, you know, first glance looks interesting, look a little closer, and you've got strange phantom things coming out of, you know, a seam. It sits weird, and then, you know, the model's hands are terrifying. Like, look at that thumb. So, you know, it's not something that would be you'd be able to replicate, and it's not something I think people would want to buy. Same thing here. Like, what is happening with that skirt, you know? And also, if you look at the arm on the model on the left-hand image, like it's so skinny and tiny. Just very strange stuff. And don't get me started on the fashion illustrations, because these are, they really do have all the symptoms of really unsophisticated computer-generated work. You know, like these are not attractive, and and they just look like poor quality AI, honestly. And I expected a lot more from a fashion AI company. Like this, you know, is something you have generated by like really low level sources. Okay, then we have the technical drawings, which, if you sent that panty bathing suit bottom out to a manufacturer, you know, because that's what technicals are used for. They're like blueprints. And you use them to coordinate with your factory. They're part of tech packs, and they show exactly how a garment is put together. Now, if you sent that panty out, you would receive, you know, your production order of 1,000 units, and you would have to destroy them because that is unsaleable. You know, it's a terrible garment. So things like that. And I promise you, there is nowhere in Norma Kamali's archive where she has used any sort of technical like this to go into a tech pack and work with her contractors. There's no way, you know, because her work is immaculate. You know, this is just a mess. And so it was not impressive, honestly. Then I looked at some of their other work because I thought, okay, is this just unique to this project? And, you know, we've got Hermes here. That's nice. But they seem to have forgotten the accent grave on the logo. So if you've got the brand and it's missing the actual brand identity, that's a problem. I wasn't set on fire by this Yves Saint Laurent in the ice cube, honestly. And here we have the likeness of the lovely Dua Lipa. If you ignore the strange text and look at her arm, I mean, she sings about hallucinations, and I am hallucinating her arm going through that silk scarf, and also that hand is just kind of frightening. Here we have something that's supposed to represent the row, and again, I'm not sure how you would ever work with a contractor to create a garment that looked or fit like this particular piece here. Then we have the likeness of the lovely Irina Shayk has sort of been used in these, and I don't think it's flattering, and I would be surprised if she was party to this particular project. Then there are things that just look like they were trained on gaming sources rather than on high fashion. And then there were things like this, like the woman underneath the car in her underwear pictures, which I found somewhat disturbing, honestly. Like it seemed really like reductive and objectifying. And that is something that Norma Kamali is, I mean, this isn't meant to represent Kamali work. This is some of the creative work that I just found on the company website. But it is just really reductive and quite frankly kind of sexist from what I was seeing. And same with images like this. Like at first, okay, but then you look closer and realize that the body modeling on the AI is really suspect. And then you've got these sort of weird jokes happening on the image on the right, which, you know, again, did not love. And it does kind of get down to the reductive nature of AI imagery in general. Like you've got like these fused fingers, you've got this misshapen foot, and it all felt very reductive and really did not feel like Kamali to me. You know, and again, this is not meant to be Kamali work. This is their other creative work, but this is the generator that is creating the avatar, right? Okay, so there is Kamali herself. I mean, this is not to say that brands don't ever come up with strange things on their own. I'm not sure that Mahatma Gandhi outfit really works for me, but that was not AI generated. That was actually generated by Kamali herself. But one of the things I love about Kamali is, she is a woman designer. She knows her body. She knows what women want to wear. Here we have Carrie Bradshaw in the Sex and the City reboot. I mean, this is a 61-year-old woman who is very confident in herself, and it is gorgeous. And this is what I think the Kamali DNA really is, right? And that is, if they can manage to get the AI designer to produce this sort of stuff, then I think that would be fantastic. So let's talk about the conclusion here. So for me, the whole premise of the AI designer is a little suspect anyway, because a designer uses their trained skills in combination with their feelings and also their kind of sensations of where the zeitgeist is moving. It is a business, not a science, but it's one that rests on creative acumen and on the expertise of the designer. Now, in the same way that the crowdsourced design projects produce some really hideous and unsaleable samples back in the advent of social media, you can't just plug in a whole lot of data and then have some machines pop out original, compelling designs. It seems that the AI generated at this point is always just rehashing tired old looks, even when old styles or trends come back, which they predictably do. As one of my favorite fashion theorists, Taylor Swift, noted, they come back stronger than a 90s trend. However, they are always spun into new and creative shapes and iterations by young designers who remember the styles from when they were kids and then fuse that fantasy remembrance with their modern sensibilities. Everything old does not become new again. It only creates new styles with references from the past. One only needs to look at the Dior menswear collection by Jonathan Anderson, where he drew on Paul Poiret looks from the 1910s. It was not a literal reinterpretation that was shown on the menswear runway. It was actually a schismatic break with a very clear antecedent. It was also a stroke of genius, and I'm not sure how you could program that into an AI model. To my mind, the AI experiment, in fact, proves the truism that the designer really is someone with a unique gift. In fact, in my experience, creative temperaments are usually in direct trajectory towards collision with the systems of manufacture and delivery. So in conclusion, Kamali's AI avatar can be read as a contemporary Pygmalion object, but only if the myth is also revised. The figure animated here is not a woman carved by a male sculptor, nor a passive body brought into being by another's desire. Kamali's case reverses that structure in important ways. She is not the statue, she is the designer who authorizes the technological modeling of her own archive. Now, the body of the digital twin is Kamali's accumulated oeuvre that is being brought to life. It is not Norma Kamali herself, but a computational relation to Kamaliness. For this reason, the Pygmalion myth offers both a seductive frame and a necessary warning. It helps explain the appeal of the designer digital twin, the dream that an archive might move, speak, and generate, but it also exposes the danger of mistaking animation for agency. Pygmalion's statue does not choose its own form. It was shaped by the desires of the maker. The lesson for AI fashion is therefore not that the most successful digital twin should conceal its artificiality. The opposite is true. If Ovid's art concealed its art, ethical AI must reveal its artifice. A responsible designer digital twin should make visible the conditions of its own production, the archive from which it learns, the model through which it generates, and the human labor that curated it. This shift also changes the meaning of succession. Fashion has always had to confront the afterlife of its founders. Houses preserve their signatures, and Kamali's AI introduces another possibility. Succession promises, through a model trained on the founder's archive, that a living designer will continue on. However, a living designer often contradicts themselves, refuses their past, responds to contemporary politics, age, failure, and begins again. An archive-trained model can recombine what has already become visible, but it cannot possess the instability that makes a creative life unfold. The governance of designer digital twins must begin from the recognition that an archive is never inert and a likeness is never neutral. Kamali's case is ethically distinct from unauthorized digital resurrection because she has publicly participated in the creation of her AI system. But that very distinction points towards more difficult future cases in which designers, celebrities, or estates may not possess the same agency. So Kamali's project shows that fashion legacy as a category is clearly entering a new phase. The archive is no longer a place where garments are stored or conserved. It can now become generative. This redistribution of authorship is likely to become especially visible in the future in luxury houses whose value is already organized around the afterlife of a named designer. With the oeuvres of Karl Lagerfeld, Yves Saint Laurent, and Alexander McQueen offering especially supportive cases because each already operates as more than a sequence of historical garments. Each functions as a recognizable design language. In this sense, the archive is not simply a repository, but a grammar of possible future objects. Now, this does not mean that the designer will disappear into the machine. Rather, authorship becomes redistributed across a post-human assemblage of the designer, the archive, the algorithm, and consumer data. The designer digital twin, therefore, requires a broader understanding of creativity, not as the isolated expression of a single hand, but as a relation among memory, code, and commerce. Kamali's digital twin, therefore, reveals a double future. On one hand, it suggests that the fashion archive can activate, but it also becomes one more participant in a wider creative ecology. The challenge, then, is not to reject the designer AI avatar, but to refuse the enchantment. A digital twin should not be governed as some miracle of posthumous continuity, as though the designer is simply returned through code, like the dearly departed during a seance. Knock 3 times on the ceiling, Coco, if we should go with the camellia or the pearls on this nubby tweed suit. It needs to be acknowledged and governed as an apparatus of power, a technical, legal, aesthetic, and commercial arrangement that decides which parts of a life and oeuvre are preserved. Norma Kamali is a fabulous designer, inspirational and always way ahead of trends and social evolutions. For me, there is just no way that an AI model trained on her past output is going to be able to create from the same place she does. If anything, her AI experiment is proving just how singular and important her unique creative process is, as it is for all creative practitioners. Thank you. My name is Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell, and this research comes from my forthcoming monograph, Stitching and Glitching a Digital Age, which argues that fashion has always been a technological system, one that shaped bodies, labor, data, and desire from the very beginning with needle and loom onto AI, smart textiles, and platform retail. I also call for a critical ethics of fashion and technology that is grounded in labor justice, material accountability, and more than human care. Stitching and Glitching a Digital Age will be published September 15th, 2026.